Okay, so according to my notes, we last left off on this PowerPoint. We finished talking about the pre-reformers, the context. We finished talking about the corruption that led to the Protestant Reformation, with the main one that triggered Martin Luther being the practice of indulgences. That's eventually going to lead to him criticizing the church with his 95 Theses, getting excommunicated, and then forming his own branch of Christianity. Okay, so Martin Luther is going to be the big player in this Protestant Reformation. He's eventually going to create Lutheranism. Okay, now some background information on him. He wasn't always a Catholic monk. Okay, he wasn't always a member of the clergy. He had started out as a lawyer. His parents had paid for him to go to the University of Wittenberg. I know it's spelled with a W, but it's pronounced with a V. Okay, so the University of Wittenberg, the city of Wittenberg, was in the Holy Roman Empire, which we today know as Germany, but it doesn't become Germany until the 19th century. Okay, so if you were to go back in time around Martin Luther's time and say, hey, I'm in Germany, they'd be like, what's Germany? Okay, it's the Holy Roman Empire. So he started out as a lawyer because his parents had paid for him to go to school in order to get this very prestigious job, because obviously your goal when you have children during this time is having somebody who can take care of you in your old age and also give you grandchildren. So they didn't want him to become a monk, because if you're a monk, you take an oath of chastity, which means no marriage, no sex, thus no children. Okay, so his parents were not very pleased with his idea to become a monk. They said, no, we're paying your tuition, you're going to be a lawyer. Well, while he is a student in law school, he gets caught up in a thunderstorm, and where there's thunder, there is lightning. And he feared for his life. He almost died in this storm. And so he prays to God, as one does when you're about to die. And he says, God, if you get me out of this, okay, you let me live, I promise to spend the rest of my life serving you. I will give up being a lawyer, and instead I will become a monk. Well, spoiler alert, he lives, and so he becomes an Augustinian monk. Okay, parents not too happy about that, but he says, sorry, I made a promise to God, and you just don't break promises to God very lightly. Now, as a monk, Martin Luther was hardcore. Okay, he was super concerned with being the best monk he possibly could. He was super concerned with the status of his eternal soul, to the point that he annoyed everybody around him. Okay, this dude didn't just go to confession once or twice a week. He went to confession every day, and he would spend hours in the confession booth. Like, not just recounting like the big stuff, like, oh, I stole, or oh, I accidentally cussed when I stubbed my toe. He would like list things that may not have even been sins, but he was so concerned that he was like, that might be a sin, so I'm going to make sure that I confess it just in case it is. Okay, so he got so annoying with how hardcore he went with being a monk that he was actually sent to teach at the University of Wittenberg, to teach religion. Okay, so that the priests and the monks in his monastery wouldn't have to deal with him and his constant confessing. Okay, so he goes off to teach theology, to teach religion at the University of Wittenberg, and that's where his issues with the Catholic Church are going to begin. Now remember, indulgences were the trigger. This was what was the catalyst, the starting point for the Protestant Reformation. Remember that indulgences were used to pay off your debt of sin. Okay, your goal is to get to heaven, the good place, and to avoid going to hell, the bad place. But most people can't just get into heaven right when they die. They probably still have some soul or some sin on their soul. So instead, they go to God's waiting room, purgatory, where they have to wait until their soul is cleansed from sin and they're clean enough to get to heaven. Well, the Catholic Church decided we need a fundraiser, and we can't sell Girl Scout cookies because they don't exist yet. So we need to sell something else in order to raise money to build the bougiest church of all time, St. Peter's Basilica, St. Peter's Cathedral. Okay, so in order to raise that money, the Pope said, well, I'm the Pope, and this is Pope Leo X. I can do what I want. Whatever I say on earth, that's what goes in heaven. Okay, dating all the way back to the first Pope of the Catholic Church, Peter the First, the disciple of Jesus. So he decided, since I have the ability to forgive people's sins, and that's given to me by God, I'm going to monetize it. Okay, I'm going to sell forgiveness of sins. And this was known as the practice of indulgences. So the Pope authorized a bunch of people to go around Europe raising money, selling these indulgences, these pieces of paper that he had signed saying, I forgive you for XYZ, in order to raise money to build this church. One of those salesmen was Johann Tetzel. Now, like all good salesmen, he had a catchy jingle. He had something that he would say, as he's trying to market these indulgences. He would say, as soon as a coin in the coffer, and the coffer is just the box where they hold money, as soon as a coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Okay, so really leaning into this selling salvation, which according to Luther was cheapening the whole process, cheapening the sacrifice that was made by God in giving his only son and crucifying him on earth for the forgiveness of the world. And Luther said, you can't find anything in the Bible that says anything about indulgences, that says anything about selling forgiveness. And if you could forgive people for all of their sins, why not just do it out of the goodness of your heart? Why are you trying to make money off of it? Okay, so this is going to be Luther's first criticism of the Catholic Church, the issue with indulgences. But this wasn't his only issue. Okay, he had 95 problems and the church was one. Okay, so he posts this article, the 95 Theses, each of these with an argument about why what the Catholic Church was doing was wrong. Okay, so one, he questions indulgences. And two, more importantly, he questions the power of the Pope to grant indulgences in the first place. So not just saying what you're doing is wrong, but also saying you have no right to sell forgiveness. Now, according to legend, on Halloween Day, he took these complaints and he posted them on the church door of the Wittenberg church in the city where he was stationed. Now, why would Martin Luther, of all places, post these complaints on the door of a church? Well, he wanted people to read these. And where does everybody go at least twice a week? They go to church. Okay, so if you were missing a cat and you wanted to put up a lost poster, if you wanted lots of people to see it for it to go viral, you would post it on the church door because everybody's going there every Sunday and Wednesday, at least, sometimes more, if they're just going in for confession instead of for a church service or a mass. And so he really wanted to get the word out about what the Catholic Church was doing. Now, that's according to legend. It's probably more likely that he just mailed his complaints to the person above him, the bishop, and then told them to mail it to the Pope. All right, so he's addressing the church directly, saying, hey, this is a problem, we should fix it. But it's a lot cooler to think, oh, he nailed it to a door with all this, spilling the tea about the Catholic Church. Okay, now why was this such a big deal when other people had already criticized the Catholic Church? Well, when Wycliffe and Huss criticized the Catholic Church, if they wanted to spread their ideas, it would have to be by word of mouth, which people tended not to want to criticize the church because it could land them in hell or they could get them killed. Or they would have to distribute pamphlets. Now, before the invention of the printing press, if you wanted to distribute written works, you'd have to make copies of those written works, hand copies of those written works. Very tedious, very time consuming, very expensive. And if the church wanted to prevent you from spreading those works, all they'd have to do is gather up the copies you made and burn them. And all of that work gone forever. You'd have to start all over. Well, with the invention of the Gutenberg printing press in the 1450s, this changed the game. Y'all, this is a huge part of why the Reformation in 1517 was able to have much more of an impact than the pre-reformers that came before. Okay, this printing press took the idea of the Asian woodblock printing and adapted it. This is a new technology, okay, a change in history. Instead of a woodblock for printing, Johann Gutenberg made movable type, okay, so individual letters along a metal frame. So it lasts longer, it's sturdier, you can use it more often and for a longer period of time. So now instead of having to carve out an entire page of a book into wood and then keep printing it until the wood fell apart, now you could just move the individual letters on that metal block in order to print whatever you wanted or change whatever you had tried to print. So if the church gathers up all of these, hundreds of documents and burns them, well, I mean, you could just fire up the printing press again and keep printing. It's kind of like their version of the internet, y'all. If I post something on the internet, I can reach so many people, okay? Instead of just mailing a letter, right? With mailing a letter, I can reach one person. But if I post something on the internet, I could reach everyone in the world potentially if it goes viral. And even if that post gets taken down, like say Facebook or Twitter takes down my meme, right? Someone could have screenshotted it and continued to spread that information. Okay, so this is a huge factor in the cause of the Reformation and why this Reformation took off, whereas others had failed. And this printing press is particularly going to be used to print copies of the Bible. So some effects of the printing press for looking at causation. It increased access to books. Books aren't as expensive anymore because they're cheaper and faster to make. Okay, the idea of supply and demand. There is now a bigger supply that can meet the demand, so it costs less money. So increased access to work or to literature, decreased price of the books. That means increased literacy. Because remember, education is expensive. It's hard to learn how to read and write if you don't have a book to help guide you. Okay, so now we have increased literacy during this time post-Renaissance because of the printing press. It also helps to spread ideas, like the ideas of the Renaissance, the medical knowledge, the technological knowledge, the scientific knowledge, the maritime trade knowledge that we have, as well as spreading the criticisms of the church. And the church can't clamp down on that information. It's being disseminated too widely because of this new technology. Okay, so essentially the Protestant Reformation is going to go viral because of this technology. Does that make sense so far? Does anybody need this slide? Superb. So he is directly challenging the church. Now, Martin Luther's intention was not to destroy the church. He wasn't trying to break up with the church and form his own new one. He wanted the Catholic Church to fix itself. Okay, he said, we've strayed from the path, but we can do a U-turn. Okay, we can get back on the right path and continue to save souls. Well, the Catholic Church's response to criticism is typically not positive. Okay, now at first, Pope Leo X, when he got these 95 Theses, he was like, this drunk German, he's written all this stuff. In a minute, he'll come to his senses and he'll beg my forgiveness, which I may give to him as long as he recants all of these complaints that he made. Well, Luther, in response to that, said, no, I'm not going to take back what I said. I meant it. Okay, you need to fix this. And the Pope is going to dig in and say, absolutely not, I'm going to kill you. So Martin Luther goes further. He not just says that the indulgences are wrong and that the Pope doesn't have the power to give indulgences. He also says the Pope is wrong. To be infallible means always right. As the representative of God on earth, the Pope was supposed to be infallible. He was divinely guided. Whatever he said was right, can't be wrong. Well, Luther says, actually, the Pope is human. And last I checked, humans made mistakes. So he is saying that the Pope can be wrong about things, like say, oh, I don't know, the Crusades. That would be a big one, right? And one of the specific points that he brings up is that the Pope was wrong to kill John Huss for pointing out criticisms of the church. So now Martin Luther is taking this a step further. He's not just saying indulgences are wrong and you don't have the authority to give them in the first place. He's also saying the Pope is human, therefore he is fallible. He can be wrong about things. And criticizing the Pope and his decisions is akin to challenging God. And that is a crime against God. What do we call a crime against God? Heresy. Good. And the punishment for this crime? Dying to death. Usually via the stake. Are we good on this slide? All right. So the Pope ends up excommunicating Martin Luther. In response to all of this, the Pope says, you're going to hell. Luther responds with, no, you're going to hell. And he sets that excommunication paper on fire. So once he gets excommunicated, that's when Luther says, okay, I'm done. Okay, I can't reform the Catholic Church. It's too far gone. They refuse to listen to reason. I'm going to make my own Christian church. Lutheranism, which isn't Catholic, it is Protestant, because he is protesting the corruption of the Catholic Church. So in forming this new branch of Christianity, he keeps the main ideas, God, Jesus, Virgin Mary, all of those things, but he does change some things. For one, he takes out the Pope. You don't need a Pope to be a good Christian. All you need is the Bible. Okay, so sola scriptura. Anything that you need to learn how to be a good Christian and get into heaven, it's in the Bible. Read it yourself. You don't need a Pope. You don't need priests. If you want to get forgiven, talk to God directly. Okay, slide into his DMs. Also, the Catholics believed that good works were required to get into heaven. Not only did you have to believe in Jesus, you also had to do good works while you were on earth. Well, Martin Luther says, actually, the Bible said it's only through faith alone, not good works. And he's big on the Bible, that gets you into heaven, because there's no way that any human could ever do enough good works to make up for the sin on their soul. They can't single-handedly get into heaven without God's help. So sola fide, through faith alone, and the grace of God, sola gratis. Scripture alone, faith alone, and grace alone. Now, does this mean he says, oh, you shouldn't do good works at all? No, but he says instead of doing good works because you think it gets you punched into heaven, okay, you should do good works because you're Christian. You should do good works because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect to be rewarded for it in the end. He also believes that you don't need monks and nuns and priests to help you get to heaven. Instead, you could study the Bible yourself. So the priesthood of all believers, we all have the ability to read the Bible and to follow its tenets, as long as we go by scripture alone and we don't follow fallible men like the Pope, who could lead us off of the use of scripture. He's also going to eliminate 5 of the holy sacraments. Remember, the Catholic Church had 7 holy sacraments. Confession, which he says you don't need confession. You can talk to God yourself. Confirmation, which is when you become an adult in the church and you confirm your Christian faith that had been imbibed upon you when you were baptized as a baby. Marriage is a sacrament. Holy orders, becoming a monk or a nun or a priest or a bishop or a cardinal or a pope. And last rites. None of these 5, and last rites is when you're dying, and so you come have a pope anoint, not a pope, a priest anoint you and hear your sins, okay, so you don't go to purgatory. None of these things could be found in the Bible as a sacrament. And so Luther said, since there's nothing in the Bible that says these are sacraments, I'm not going to count them. I'm only going to count what's in the Bible. So the only two sacraments that were left were baptism, because Jesus was baptized by his cousin, John the Baptist, and communion, the body and blood of Christ taken in remembrance of his sacrifice before he was crucified. Okay, now the Catholics believed in transubstantiation, which, remember, transubstantiation is when the bread and the wine transform. The substance changes into the literal body and blood of Christ. It is a chemical miracle. You can't drop the bread because you're dropping Jesus. Okay, you can't toss it out for the birds to eat, okay, because it's Jesus. Okay, it is holy. Well, Martin Luther, in reading the Bible, says it doesn't say anything about it being literal. So he believed in consubstantiation. And the way I remember the difference is when I think trans, I think change. When I think con, I think of the word in Spanish, which means with. Okay, so instead of saying that the bread and the wine transformed into Jesus, literally, he says that in consubstantiation, Jesus is there with us during the ceremony, but he's not in the bread or the wine. He's there with us spiritually. Okay, we're not literally eating him. Does that make sense? Very slight difference, y'all, but it's going to be enough for there to be over 100 years, over a century of religious wars, Christians killing Christians over these ideas, over who is loving Jesus the right way. Another thing that Martin Luther does is he rejects all the monastic tenets. Tenets just means beliefs, or the rules that monks and nuns and priests have to follow. So in the Catholic Church, if you take on a holy order, you take an oath of poverty. Well, he said, no, you don't need to do that. You can just be a regular person. You have to take an oath of chastity. He said, no, I'm going to get married and I'm going to have kids. Even though I'm a priest, even though I'm a leader in the Lutheran Church, I'm not going to ban clergy members from having families. And then also, of course, the oath of obedience. Ironically, Luther actually marries an ex-nun. So he, an ex-Catholic monk, marries an ex-Catholic nun, both of whom took oaths of chastity under the Catholic Church, and they get married and they have a bunch of kids. Okay, so if you're a preacher in the Lutheran Church, you don't have to take an oath of chastity or poverty. You can get married, you can have kids, you can have a house, you can have a bed, all of those different things. Because he says there's nothing in the Bible that says we have to do that. He is big on following what he finds in the scriptures. Sola scriptura, sola fide, and sola gratis. Does that make sense so far? All right. So the Catholic Church, they make Martin Luther public enemy number one. Okay, he is criticizing them publicly, and a lot of people are listening to him. That threatens the power of the papacy. They want to lock this down. They want to not only excommunicate him, but also execute him. And so he's going to be tried at the Diet of Worms. Remember that the W is pronounced like a V. Worms is a city in the Holy Roman Empire. A diet refers to a trial or a meeting. So this is a meeting in the city of Worms where they discuss the crimes of Martin Luther. Now, this tribunal in the Holy Roman Empire has the power to burn people at the stake, like what they did to John Huss. So this is what's on the line for Martin Luther. He's on trial for heresy, and if he's found guilty, he knows he'll be burnt at the stake for his beliefs. So a lot is on the line. Now, Charles V, he was the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, he's also known as Charles I. So if you see him referred to as Charles I, that's because he's the King of Spain. But in addition to ruling Spain, oh, and by the way, he's of the Habsburg family, which we're going to be talking a lot about them eventually. Okay, the Habsburg royal family. He's the first Charles to rule Spain, so he's called Charles I. But when he becomes the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, he is the 5th Charles to rule that. Same person, y'all, different titles. Okay, kind of like if I go by Jacqueline or if I go by Jackie, same person, just different ways of addressing me. Okay, so King of Spain and the King of the Holy Roman Empire at the same time, depending on where he is, he's either called the 1st or the 5th. Now, Charles V promised a fair trial to Martin Luther. He said, come plead your case, I'll hear you out, okay? You don't have to worry about me killing you before the trial takes place. But after hearing Martin Luther out at the Diet of Worms, Charles V says, look, you're going to get killed. The only way to save your soul, the only way to avoid execution is if you publicly take back what you said about the Catholic Church. If you recant what you said about the Pope and the church and corruption and all that, and you go back to being a good monk. Martin Luther said, I said what I said. Here I stand. I can do no other. So he refuses to take back. He says, no takesy backsies. I stand by what I said. The Catholic Church is wrong. If you're going to kill me, then kill me. I have to follow my conscience. I believe everything that I wrote. And so the Edict of Worms is going to be issued, this command, the edict. And this declares that Martin Luther is guilty of heresy, so he's a heretic, and he's also an enemy of the state. So an order is put out to arrest him on sight so that he can be executed. Now, spoiler alert, he doesn't get executed. He is protected. Nobles in Germany, okay, powerful political leaders kidnap him and keep him safe from the Catholic Church because they see a political opportunity here. The power of the Pope has been declining. Secular leaders like kings and nobles want to increase their power. If they break off from the Catholic Church, then the head of the Catholic Church can't boss them around. Just like how Leo III in the Byzantine Empire said, what, the Pope excommunicated me? I don't care. I don't think the Pope has that power. So political rulers are going to protect Martin Luther because they stand a chance to increase their political power as the church's power wanes. Now, in the Schoology page, all right, does anyone need this slide? In the Schoology page, there is a video of a movie adaptation of the story of Martin Luther. Ralph Fiennes, the guy who played Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter series, he is depicting Martin Luther in this video. I highly recommend that y'all go and watch that video because it explains a lot of the controversy that was going on around what Luther was saying about the church. You're going to see a guy sitting in a throne with a funny hat and funny hair. That's King Charles V, young dude. You're going to see a bunch of people in red robes. That's the Inquisition. That's the Catholic clergy members, the cardinals and the bishops. Okay, they're all done up and fancy and rich looking compared to Martin Luther, who's just in a simple brown robe with a weird haircut. Okay, and so for the rest of the class period, okay, we're going to end here for today. I want you to go into the Schoology page, find this video under the lecture series, and I want you to watch it. After the Edict of Worms, remember that the Edict of Worms convicted him of the crime of heresy and labeled him an enemy of the state. And they said, we need to arrest Martin Luther and burn him at the stake for committing a crime against God. But we know that he wasn't actually burnt at the stake, that he escaped. So how did he end up escaping this execution? Well, he was kidnapped, but in a good way, okay? The person who kidnapped him was a Holy Roman elector, because these are a bunch of groups of rich nobles who elect who their emperor is. It's not really a democracy because it's still very classist. You know, they didn't ask everybody who should be in charge. They just asked the people with money who should be in charge. But he was a noble lord, okay? When he finds out that Martin Luther is condemned to death, as Martin Luther heads back from Worms to Wittenberg, he kidnaps him for his own protection and stores him away in his castle. Now, remember, everyone was Catholic. So why would a Catholic defend a Protestant heretic? Because they were politically motivated. Okay, Luther was religiously motivated. He had issues with the church that dealt with his eternal soul and what he thought was right or wrong. A lot of the German princes, however, are going to see a political opportunity. The Pope has been really getting on their nerves. The Pope not only has religious power, but also has political power. So let's say that Frederick III had a bunch of land, and the Pope said, hey, I want this territory that you own to become a monastery. Give it to me. I mean, can the elector say no? Can he say, no, that's my land, I don't want to give it to the Pope? No, because then he would be putting his eternal soul in jeopardy. And even if he didn't believe the Pope had that power, if he gets excommunicated by the Pope, then all of his serfs and the people living on his manor are probably going to be a little bit upset that their leader has been excommunicated. They don't want to follow him to hell. So as soon as he becomes excommunicated, he would lose political power as well. Okay, and so he sees, and other princes see, an opportunity to use this Reformation to increase their political power and their wealth. All the lands in Germany, in the Holy Roman Empire, that were Catholic could now become Protestant, and they could claim them for their own estate. Okay, but prior to seeing this political opportunity, Frederick III was very concerned with getting into heaven. Now, he did have enough money to buy indulgences, but in addition to using indulgences to get off time in purgatory, you could also use holy relics. These are holy symbols of the faith. So like a piece of the cross that Jesus was crucified on, a twig from Moses's burning bush, hay from the bed that Jesus was put in when he was born in the barn. There are a lot of people selling stuff saying like, oh, this is totally from the cross that Jesus was crucified on. This is the nail that went through his foot. And they'd sell it for a ton of money by saying that it was a holy relic. Now, why would they want the relic in the first place? Because it gets them time out of purgatory. In fact, there would be parades where various saints' body parts would be carried through the streets for people to look at them or to pray at them. They'd be displayed in the churches. So they're not only collecting things like, the manger or a burning bush, they're also collecting bodily fluids and actual body pieces, like milk from the Virgin Mary. That was a relic that Frederick III claimed to have. A thumb from one of the saints. Like over here, we see an arm. Over here, we see a heart of a saint preserved as a relic. So relics were a big business, just like indulgences were. So if he earned 2 million years worth of time out of purgatory, why would he risk all of that to protect a heretic? Because political motivation. He believed that he and other princes could increase their power in the Holy Roman Empire and be free from the political power of the Pope. So when he kidnaps Martin Luther, he keeps him protected for a number of years in his manor. And so what are you going to do if you got a couple of years to burn and you don't have Netflix? Okay, well, Luther said, I'm going to take the entire Catholic Bible, the Vulgate, which is like 70 something books long, right? And I'm going to translate it into German to make it more accessible. Okay, and now this translation of the Bible is going to spread like wildfire because of the printing press. So the printing press, I can't underestimate, I can't express just how important this was to the success of the Protestant Reformation. It spread ideas. And once those ideas are out, the Catholic Church can't rein them back in. So that's going to continue to undermine the authority of the Catholic Church. Remember that they had taken a bunch of L's in the Middle Ages. The Black Death, the Crusades, the failed Cluniac reforms, all of these things led to the decrease or the decline in papal authority. Now, Martin Luther is going viral, and it's going to continue to undermine the authority of the church. They start losing nobles. okay, to Lutheranism, which means they're losing power. Okay, so access to the Bible increases because Martin Luther translates the whole thing, and thus the power of the Catholic Church declines. Now, Wycliffe had also translated parts of the Bible, but not the whole thing. And even though he translated those parts of the Bible, again, he didn't have a printing press to widely distribute them. So a lot of factors as to why the pre-reformers weren't as successful as Martin Luther. Are we good so far? Excellent. All right, so what's going to happen is that Europe is going to splinter between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. And if you look at this map, because you are going to have to interpret documents on DBQs and SAQs, if you look at this map, you can see the play out of who stays Catholic and who goes Protestant. And a lot of it has to do with geography. Where is the center of the Catholic Church? Where does the Pope live? Italy, specifically in Rome. So what you'll notice is that most of these areas close to Italy stay Catholic. They're in yellow. Most of the areas far away from Italy, as far away as you can get, are going to be Protestant. So if you draw a line through Europe, up here is Protestant, down here is Catholic. That has to do with geography. Can the Catholic powers exert control over this area? Well, over this area, yeah, they have the Mediterranean Sea. But up here, that's when it gets more difficult. And so the northern half of Europe, particularly the Holy Roman Empire, Norway and Sweden, and even England, are going to become Protestant. Now, England is going to be Anglican, which is a different type of Protestantism, where Henry VIII broke off from the church and started his own Protestant church because he wanted to marry his side chick. He had gotten Anne Boleyn pregnant. He wanted to divorce his first wife. The Pope wouldn't let him divorce his first wife. So Henry VIII said, fine, I'm going to make myself the Pope of my own church, and I'm going to grant myself a divorce so I can marry my baby mama. Okay, so that's going to be a whole different type of Protestant religion, and it is going to be politically motivated. Okay, remember that the emergence of Lutheranism through Luther was religiously motivated. Henry VIII is going to be politically motivated. And then as Lutheranism spreads and it becomes more popular, various princes and noble lords are going to say, hey, I see a political opportunity that we can take here to free ourselves from the power of the papacy. Okay. Southern Germany, like down here in Munich and around Austria, still going to be Catholic. Why? Look how close it is to Italy. It's neighbors to Italy. Spain, it's going to be super Catholic. Okay, because it just is, right? And then France is going to be mostly Catholic, but you are going to have Calvinism pop up, particularly with the emergence of the French Calvinists, the Huguenots. And we're going to talk about them in depth later. But really, Calvinism isn't going to take off too far except in the New World. Okay, it's going to spread through the Puritans and the Pilgrims in the British colonies of North America. And so that's where we're going to see most of their influence there. But most of the influence in Europe at this time is going to be Protestant versus Catholic, specifically with Lutheranism and Anglicanism. Calvinism is a little bit more of a fringe group that rises in power over time. Does this make sense so far? So we have a lot of religious reform. Okay, the issue with Catholicism isn't, or the issues at the time aren't just restricted to religious corruption. There's also a call for social reform. Okay, so the peasants in Germany see everything that's going on with Lutheranism, and they see this religious reform. They are hearing from Martin Luther that everyone is equal, that there's a priesthood of all believers, and that it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, God still loves you and you can get into heaven. Well, they're inspired by this religious reform to ask for social reform. Y'all may remember that the social hierarchy in Europe was based on feudalism, where serfs were down here and the wealthy, the nobles, were up here. Okay, serfs really didn't have a lot of rights. They weren't slaves because they couldn't be bought or sold, but the land they worked and lived on didn't belong to them, and they could be sold with that land. Okay, so they issued the 12 articles demanding an end to serfdom and the manorial system. And they believed that Luther would support them because they're inspired by what he's saying in his religious reforms. Hey, this is corrupt, it's unequal, it's unfair to the poor, that the rich can just buy their way into heaven. Okay, by that logic, serfdom is unfair to the poor because they're consistently kept at the bottom of society. Now, did Luther support the peasants in their interpretation of his reform movement? No. Keep in mind, Luther is protected by the nobles. They're keeping him alive. They're keeping him from being burnt at the stake. Can the peasants really protect Luther? No, they don't have power. And so Luther is just like, I don't know them. He's like, no, this is not what I meant when I did these reforms. Please don't upset the nobles. They're keeping me alive. But the peasants go on and they revolt anyway. Okay, but the key point here is that Luther did not support the peasants because he was being kept alive by the nobles. Now, this uprising is going to be unsuccessful, is going to be brutally and violently put down by the nobles. And what's unique about this is that it's not just Catholic nobles that fight the peasants, it's also Lutheran nobles. So you may remember they were just fighting each other. It was Catholic versus Lutheran nobles. Well, class, social class, supersedes their religious beliefs. Okay, when their money is threatened, they put aside their differences religiously and gang up to defeat the poors. Okay, so even if they are fighting for religious reform, their bottom line is we want to continue staying up here at the top of society. And so as a result, the Catholics and the Lutherans team up to put down the peasants. Once they're done putting down the peasants, they go back to killing each other. So it's a temporary truce to make sure they maintain power before they go back to killing each other. Now, if you see this referred to as the Peasants' War, the German Peasants' Revolt, the Swabian Peasant Uprising, it's all talking about the same thing. It's just different ways of saying the same thing. Okay, so Luther wasn't really a man of the people. All right, he was supporting the nobles over the peasants. Are we good so far? So peasant uprising is put down. Now it's time to fight each other over who loves Jesus the most. Now the French and the Spanish had already been fighting each other. Okay, not for religious reasons, but for political reasons. Remember that the Spanish were Catholic. Let me see if I can change this pen color. The Spanish were Catholic and the French were Catholic, but they were fighting each other for political reasons. The Habsburg family is Spanish. The Valois family is French. And there are a series of wars between the Valois and the Habsburgs. Now you'll notice that the King of Spain, Charles I, was also the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. Same person, same Charles. He's the first in Spain, the fifth in Germany. So if you look at where France is positioned on this map, they are in between their enemy. They're stuck in the middle fighting Spain as well as the Spanish forces that are in the Holy Roman Empire because they're all under the same ruler. This is not a good position to be in. You never want to fight a two-front war. That's what gets Napoleon in trouble when he tries to conquer Europe. He tries to conquer Spain and Russia at the same time. It's what gets Hitler in trouble. He tries to fight a two-front war over here while at the same time fighting Russia over here. It divides up your resources and undermines your strategy. So France decided, we don't want to be at a disadvantage by having a united front against us here and here. So what can we do? Well, the French decide that even though they are Catholic, they are going to help the Protestants in the Holy Roman Empire. So they're going to try to get Charles V to have to fight them as well as the Protestants, which means that the French have a better chance at winning. Okay, so France was Catholic, but for political reasons. They wanted Germany to be fragmented. They wanted to keep the Spanish Empire from holding much power to the east of them. And so they are going to side with the League of Smalkalken, which is just a fun word to say. Okay, this league was made up of Lutheran princes and nobles like Frederick III, who decided, we don't want to be Catholic anymore, we want to be Protestant. Well, that's going to tick off Charles V, who is super Catholic. So he's going to tell them, hey, cut that out. Stop breaking from the church, or else. And they decide, well, fine, we're going to see what the or else means. So Charles V sends his military to his empire in Germany to try to put down the Protestant uprising. But at the same time, the Catholic French of the Valois are also helping the Protestants. And so the Habsburg dynasty in Spain is fighting a ton of wars at the same time that's draining on their military, that's draining on their finances, okay? And it makes it difficult to win both at the same time, okay? Now, how does this end? The League in the Holy Roman Empire wins. So the Protestants in Germany win against Charles V. But when it comes to Charles V fighting France, he wins. So he wins one, he loses one. What are the long-lasting effects of this? Well, even though he wins his war against the French, Germany is still going to be decentralized, and it's still going to be Protestant. He can't kill Protestantism. And that's going to be a huge problem for the Catholic Church, because look at all that land. Look at all that power that they're losing with all of these conversions to Lutheranism. So this is actually an L for Catholicism. The Protestants win in the Holy Roman Empire, thus leading to the Peace of Augsburg, which allows you to pick to be Catholic or Lutheran. Okay, whichever one the noble lords want to be, that's what they get to be, and that's what all their subjects are going to be. And thus, there's no getting rid of Protestantism. It is here to stay. Europe becomes fragmented religiously. Germany becomes fragmented just religiously and politically. And that's going to prevent it from becoming its own country until 1871. Okay, so keep in mind with these wars, Protestants win in the League. In the war between the Catholics, the Spanish win. But in the end, who wins? The Protestants in terms of long-term effects. Why did the Protestant princes convert to Lutheranism in the first place? To increase their power and their land. Now all of this land that used to be Catholic is free to grab up, and land is money. Are we good so far? All right. So speaking of the Habsburg dynasty, I want to express to y'all how large this empire is. This Habsburg dynasty is going to rule over Spain for a very, very long time. So here in the New World, we see the Spanish Empire that was given to them by the Treaty of Tordesillas. This is all the land that Charles V/I controls. Okay, Brazil had been given to Portugal in the Treaty of Tordesillas. So we have a large maritime empire in the New World. They also control most of the Iberian Peninsula, dating back to 1492 in the Reconquista. And then they hold a seat of power in the eastern part of Europe with the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, he's the 5th Holy Roman Emperor. He's the 1st Charles of Spain. And then here in red, that's where you see the various peasant uprisings that occurred. So you can see why France would side with the Protestants, because how powerful is Spain? Super powerful. They are literally a superpower. And so as Spain fights France, The France are also going to be fighting the Spanish here, but they're also going to be helping the Protestants fight over here. Okay, so this is good for them politically, even though they are just as Catholic as the Spanish. So political trumps the religious. Are we good so far? Now, the Habsburg dynasty is a very interesting dynasty in world history because it is super, super inbred. Y'all may already know this, but the kings and queens in Europe were all related and they kept marrying into their own families. And so it just kept getting more and more incesty as time went on, because the whole issue was, oh, well, you can't marry down in status. You have to marry someone who's of equal or higher status. And that's only going to be the other kings and queens and princes and princesses. So up here with Charles V, we see they have a couple of children, and those children end up marrying like their second cousin, right? Or this woman married her first cousin, right? And they had a daughter who then ended up marrying her brother, Philip II. So Anne married her uncle. Okay, roll tide, right? As this family line gets more and more incestual, you start seeing more and more genetic issues emerge. Okay, inherited diseases like hemophilia that really put the line of the Habsburg family in danger. In fact, by the time Philip IV and Mary Anne of Austria married, they were so closely related, not like they had the same parents, but they were so closely related from all this inbreeding, they were genetically as similar as brother and sister. So the final Habsburg was Charles II of Spain. Remember, this one was the first up here. And he is going to have some extreme genetic disorders. You can even see from the portraits of the Habsburg some of the family traits that were passed down, like this notable chin. This was known as the Habsburg chin. And it's essentially an underbite where the lower part of their jaw would go beyond the top part of their mouth, and resulted in Charles II, who over in this picture looks a lot like sexy Squidward. All right, so remember that these portrait painters, they're getting paid to paint these kings and queens in the best possible light. So this is with a filter, y'all. Okay, so this is the best they could have possibly looked. Charles II wasn't expected to live past childhood. Like he was a medical miracle in that he lived as long as he did into his 40s. But with his facial deformity, with that underbite, his tongue was too big for his mouth. And so he's constantly drooling. He couldn't speak correctly, which actually led to a change in the Spanish language in Europe with the pronunciations. I think it's a V is pronounced as a B in Spanish in Europe, but not in the New World. It's because the king couldn't say the words correctly. So everyone started mimicking what he was doing so he wouldn't feel, embarrassed. So it changes an entire language because of inbreeding. When he died, they found water on his brain and they couldn't find any blood in his body. It was freaky, right? And he was so inbred that it was physically impossible for him to have a child. So his family line, the Habsburg family line, dies with him. Now it's an issue when a dynasty dies because you don't know who's supposed to inherit the throne. If he doesn't have a son, who's next in line? Well, that's going to lead to a war, the War of Spanish Succession. Who is supposed to succeed to be the next in line for the Spanish throne after Charles II dies childless? And eventually it's going to be reconciled with the Treaty of Utrecht. And we are going to cover that later in this lecture series. So don't feel like you're like, oh, what was that about again? We're going to get to it. Okay. But just remember this face when we get to the War of Spanish Succession. Remember that all the inbreeding in the European royal families led to the deaths of some dynasties. Now that we've had all of those religious wars, the League of Schmalkalden and the Holy Roman Empire, we know that Charles I lost that war. He had tried to erase Protestantism from his empire because remember, Spain is super duper Catholic. and he was the king of Spain, while at the same time being the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. But the Holy Roman Empire was politically decentralized and fragmented, and political leaders in this empire, like the nobles and the electors, decided, we don't want to be Catholic anymore. We see a political opportunity to gain more power and more wealth if we're no longer under the control of the Pope, so we're going to be Protestant. Hence all this area in blue and red. Okay, now Charles I had a big problem with that, so that's why he sent his troops to go fight the Lutheran princes, but he lost. As a result of the loss of that Schmalkalden War, he had to sign the Peace of Augsburg. Now, the Peace of Augsburg is going to allow for religious tolerance, but not like a blanket religious tolerance. It's not a matter of, we're going to allow Jewish people and Muslim people and Calvinist people in the Holy Roman Empire. No. Okay. They say that you have two options. There's only two faiths on the menu, and they're both Christian. You can either be Lutheran or you can be Catholic. And now this isn't saying that anybody in the Holy Roman Empire gets to decide which one they are. This is only for the people in power. The nobles, okay, the nobles in the Holy Roman Empire get to choose what faith their manor is going to be. Everyone who lives on their land has to be whatever faith they are. So if you are a Lutheran prince, okay, everybody on your manor has to be Lutheran. If they're Catholic, they need to leave. They need to go find somewhere else to live where they can be Catholic. Okay, this is through Curius Regio, Eius Religio. Who's the region? His religion. So whoever rules that area gets to decide, I'm Lutheran or I'm Catholic. If you're Catholic living in a Lutheran manor, you're in trouble, and vice versa. Okay, so what are the long-lasting effects of this Peace of Augsburg? Well, it's going to permanently divide Germany religiously. The north is going to be Protestant. Okay, look at how far away it is from Rome. The south is going to be Catholic. Now, they were already politically fragmented as city-states. Now you add religious fragmentation on top of that, and that's going to have the long-term effect of delaying unification of Germany until 1871. So it's not until the 19th century that we get what we today consider modern-day Germany. Okay, so we're going to see the fall of the Holy Roman Empire and the unification of a new country of Germany in 1871, but it takes so long because of how fragmented they are. Okay, because of how divided they are over the issue of religion. So even though this is a peace treaty, it only temporarily sets up religious tolerance. They're going to have yet another war where the Calvinists are going to say, hey, we want to be able to practice as well. So add in another religion, Catholicism, Calvinism, and Lutheranism. But right here in 1555, there's only two options. A very limited menu. Does that make sense so far? Speaking of Calvinists, we are going to talk about the beginning of the Calvinist church. Now, if you are a Calvinist in England, you're called Puritans. Okay, a English Calvinist is a Puritan. If you're in France and you're a Calvinist, then you are called a Huguenot. Okay, Huguenot may not be familiar to y'all, but you should have heard of Puritans. Okay, they migrate over to the British colonies in the New World. Plymouth Bay, Massachusetts Bay, or sorry, Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts Bay. Okay, that is why we get a Protestant nation in the modern United States, is because of the migration of the Puritans. They're going to bring Calvinism to the Americas. Okay, so the only difference between Puritans and Huguenots is that one is in England, the other is in France. But they're both Calvinist, which is a type of Protestantism. Okay, so remember, we have Lutherans, we have Calvinists, and we have Anglicans versus the Catholics. Both of them are Christian, just in different ways. Are we good so far? So who starts Calvinism? Well, that would be John Calvin. Okay, much like Luther, he names his religion after himself. Much like Luther, he was a lawyer who then became a priest. And much like Luther, he was also influenced by the pre-reformers like Erasmus. Remember that Erasmus wrote that satirical work in praise of folly, making fun of the Catholic Church and its hypocrisy. So he has a lot in common with Martin Luther, except Martin Luther was German and John Calvin is going to be French. Okay, now he's going to be kicked out of France because remember, France is Catholic. Even though they'll side with the Protestants when it comes to political measures that benefit them, like when they're fighting against Spain, okay, they're still going to be Catholic. And so he's going to be exiled. He's going to be kicked out of his homeland from France into Switzerland. And that's where he's going to build his following and his new religion, okay, around the 1530s. Okay, so Luther beat him to the punch. Luther was successful in breaking from the Catholic Church. That's going to inspire other people to break from the Catholic Church. Does that make sense? All right, so what did Calvin believe? Well, he wrote down all of his beliefs in a book called The Institutes of the Christian Religion. Note how since it's typed, it's italicized. If I had handwritten this in an essay, I would have underlined it as the title of a book. Okay, so some of the ideas that Calvin had included predestination. And y'all, this is bolded, so it is important that you know it. You need to know what predestination is. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's people having a destiny, determining where they go, to heaven or to hell. If you go to heaven, you're a member of the elect. If you are destined to go to hell, then you are a reprobate. Now, God in the Christian religion is all-knowing. He is omniscient. He knows what you're going to do before you even think about doing it. Before you're even born, according to Calvin, he knows where you're going to go when you die, heaven or hell. And is God ever wrong? No, he is not. Okay, he can see everything that ever has happened, everything that's currently happening, and everything that's going to happen in the future. So it is predestined before you're even born and start sinning, okay, that you're either going to go to heaven or hell. And so Calvin says that since it's predestined, there's nothing that you can do to change your status of being elect or being reprobate. Therefore, free will does not exist. Okay, Luther's going to have a problem with that, which is why Calvin decides I'm going to form my own separate religion, or my own separate branch of the Christian Protestant religion. Okay, now obviously you want to be an elect, but how do you know? How do you know if you're going to heaven or hell? You already know it's predestined and God knows, but you can't just slide into God's DMs and be like, hey, can you give me a hint on whether or not I'm going to heaven or going to hell? And so Calvin said there are certain signs that you could look for to see where you were destined to go. So signs of the elect, signs that you were going to heaven. Do you do a lot of good works? Now, these aren't you doing good works so you can earn your way into heaven, because you can do all the good works in the world, but if you're already destined to go to hell, then it's not going to matter. Okay? But if you do a lot of good works, that is a sign that you're possibly one of the elect. They also had visible saints. Okay, so people who had religious experiences or people who had a lot of money. Now, what does money have to do with going into heaven? Well, Calvin believed that if you worked hard and followed God's word, then God would reward you. And one of those rewards that he could give you would be money. Okay, so why would God give all these blessings? Why would God give all of this money to somebody who's destined to go to hell? Okay, that wouldn't make sense. So because God gave them all this money, then they must be heading to heaven when they die. So they conflate the idea of wealth with holiness. Okay, this is what we're going to see in the Americas when the Puritans come over and start something called the Protestant work ethic. The idea that if you work hard, then God will reward you. If you're rich, you must have worked hard for it, for God to reward you with it. Therefore, you deserve it. Therefore, you're going into heaven. And that's going to start the basis of support for capitalism in the British colonies that eventually become the United States. Another big sign that you're going to heaven was if you had a vision, if you had a conversion experience, like you're in church and all of a sudden God talks to you. Okay, all of these signs make you a member of the elect, which also makes you a voting church member if you're male. A voting adult in the church. And this is an important key point, because as a voting member of the church, your job is to enforce behavior and the law. And under the Calvinist faith, church and state are not going to be separated. They are going to be a theocracy where the church and the government work together. So not only are sins going against God, but sins are also legal crimes. No separation of church and state. If you sin, you're not only adding something to your soul, but you're also committing a crime against their society in Geneva, Switzerland. And the Calvinists are going to be very militant and uncompromising about their beliefs. So like the Catholics, they are going to convict people of crimes based on their religious beliefs and even burn some of them at the stake. Okay, because they're very serious, about following the Bible to the letter in the creation of their laws, and the idea that there are some people destined for heaven and there are some people destined for hell. Does that make sense so far? But Calvin can't create his theocracy in France. He got kicked out of France. So he's going to build it in Geneva in Switzerland. Okay, this is going to become a Calvinistic theocracy, the new center of Reformation in Europe. Okay, the law comes from the Bible. Sins are crimes. And if you don't like it, then don't live here. So why are people going to Geneva, Switzerland? Well, as Protestants, they're getting kicked out of Catholic countries. Okay, like Calvin, they get kicked out of the Catholic country of France. Okay, the Catholic country of Scotland, the Catholic country of England, because this is prior to England breaking with the Catholic Church. And as they're kicked out and excommunicated from their communities, they need to go somewhere where they can practice their Protestant beliefs. And so they come to Geneva in Switzerland. But here's the deal. If you live in Switzerland, in Geneva, in this Calvinistic theocracy, you need to be committed to Calvinist beliefs. Therefore, you're going to be under Calvinist laws. And they can pursue you for crimes that if you go against their religious beliefs. Now, the church in the Calvinist religion is going to be a little bit different from the Catholic hierarchy. In the Catholic hierarchy, you have a pope at the top, and the pope makes the rules. Whatever he holds on earth will be upheld in heaven. So he gets to pick who the cardinals are. He gets to pick who the bishops are. He gets to assign priests to certain manors and to certain dioceses. Okay, the Calvinist church is going to be different. Number one, they don't have a pope. They don't have a pope calling the shots. Instead, the members of the elect, okay, church members, choose who is going to be their preacher, who's going to be their priest. So whereas in the Catholic Church, you don't get to pick who's going to lead your Sunday school, right? You're told the Pope picked this guy, so you're going to listen to him. In the Calvinist Church, they get to choose who leads their church. They get to vote on policies and laws, like what is a crime according to the Bible? What is the punishment for breaking those crimes? And the church is not under the state. It is not subordinate to the state. The church is the state. Religious beliefs become laws. And as a result, sins become crimes. Are we good so far? All right, so for the crime of heresy, the punishment remains the same, burning at the stake. One person that the Calvinists burn at the stake is Michael Servetus. He denied the Trinity. Remember that the Trinity is the idea of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. It's not polytheism. They're all the same God. All right, he denied that Jesus was holy, and so they killed him at the stake. The consistory is the group of judges who lay down that punishment. Okay, so these are a bunch of justices, of judges, older members of the church who are male, it's a patriarchy, who have the power to lay down punishment on those who break God's law. So what are some examples of breaking God's law? Well, if you drink alcohol, that's breaking the law. If you sing, that's breaking the law. If you dance or whistle, that's breaking the law. Lending money and charging interest, that's called usury. That's breaking the law. And gambling is breaking the law. And so you have a bunch of older men in the church who get to decide, we saw you dancing in your TikTok challenge, and so the punishment for this is A, B, or C. Okay, so they take their law very seriously, they take their religion very seriously, and they are militant and uncompromising when it comes to their beliefs. They're willing to kill and they're willing to die for those beliefs. One of those beliefs, like we said before, is the Protestant work ethic, the importance of hard work, and that if you work hard, God will reward you, usually in the form of money. And so if you have money, you must be going to heaven. You must be a member of the elect and not a reprobate. This is going to lead for the foundation for capitalism in the United States, because the more money you acquire, okay, the better of a person you must be. And the whole idea of capitalism is to gain capital, to gain money, which is why we're going to see the foundation of Protestantism in the United States as opposed to Catholicism, and the foundation of capitalism as opposed to mercantilism once the British colonies rebel from the mother country. So remember, all of this leads to the Puritans in England, who then migrate to become Puritans in the United States, the former British colonies. Are we good so far? All right, 2 more slides, y'all. Let's make it through. So the whole time this is going on, what is the Catholic Church doing? Well, they are freaking out, right? Because the Catholic Church is losing followers. They used to hold all the power. All of Europe used to be Catholic. All of Europe used to follow the Pope. But now Martin Luther comes along and starts a different Christian religion. That inspires others like Calvin to create their own. That inspires Henry VIII to create his own. So this is really bad for the religious and the political authority of the Catholic Church. So they need to react to what's going on. They couldn't stop the Protestant Reformation from happening. So what do they do now to convince people to stop leaving? Okay, so the Council of Trent is a part of that reaction to the Reformation. And this isn't just one meeting, it's going to be multiple meetings where a bunch of members of the clergy come together and they discuss, what are our Catholic beliefs? What are we going to keep? And what are we going to change about the church? So they define Catholic dogma. And dogma is just a $20 word for beliefs. Now, there's not going to be a lot of change. Okay, historical thinking skill. There's not going to be a lot of change in the Catholic Church. This is really the big change. They get rid of the corruption. It's like, oh, you couldn't have done that before, right? Maybe this could have prevented the Protestant Reformation in the first place. So they're like, okay, the Pope having baby mamas, the clerical ignorance, the nepotism, simony, pluralism, absenteeism, all of that's bad. We got to decrease corruption. But that's pretty much the only thing they change. Everything else they keep the same. Whereas Luther said you only need scripture, faith, and grace, they said no, you need grace and good works. So continue to do good works as a Catholic. Whereas Luther said there's only 2 sacraments, communion and baptism, the Catholics say no, we're going to keep all 7. Baptism, the Eucharist, confirmation, confession, holy orders, marriage, and last rites. So they say, no, Luther's wrong. We still have 7. Oh, and by the way, our communion is still transubstantiation, the literal body and blood of Jesus Christ. It is a chemical miracle. So continuity, continuity. Now, Luther had translated the Bible into German. The Catholics said, that Bible doesn't count. That Bible could have changed something from the Latin Bible, so we're going to stick with the Vulgate. Once again, a continuity. Well, since the Vulgate is in Latin, you're going to need somebody to read it for you. And so this reinforces the need for priests and bishops and cardinals. So you do need priests to interpret the Bible for you. You cannot do the job of interpreting the Bible. Okay? That is for the clergy to do. Go to them for advice. Whereas Luther said, we don't need monks and nuns. We can get married and still lead the church. The Catholic Church said, nope, we're going to keep monastic tenets. You have to take an oath of chastity. You have to take an oath of obedience and an oath of poverty. Okay? And purgatory is still going to be a thing. Okay? The big issue that Martin Luther had, indulgences, the whole thing, okay, that started his 95 Theses, they are going to keep indulgences. Okay, so indulgences are still a thing after the Council of Trent. Now, are they going to be selling them in the marketplace willy-nilly? No, they're going to tone down the fundraising, but they're still going to say the Pope has the power to issue indulgences. This is fine. They're just not going to be as blatant about it. So continuity, 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 continuity. Here is the only change. They reform some of the corruption. They try to address the worst abuses of the corruption. But y'all, this is too little, too late. The Protestant Reformation has already happened. So this is more of a public relations stunt, a PR stunt, to try to convince people, hey, stay with us. Please don't cancel your membership. Please don't go be Protestant. Okay, because they couldn't kill Luther and they couldn't kill the Protestant Reformation. The cat's out of the bag. They are going to continue to lose power. Are we good so far? All right then, last slide for the PowerPoint. The effects of the Reformation. So another historical thinking skill here, cause and effect. Prior to the Reformation, Europe used to be completely Catholic. Now, it's a bunch of different Christian religions. So the unity of Western Christianity is shattered. Not only do they have Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, now they have Protestantism, and there's a ton of different types of Protestants. You've got Calvinists, you've got Lutherans, you've got Anglicans. What does this mean for the church? It decreases in power and authority. It's also going to lead to a lot of conflict, because even though Catholics and Protestants are both Christian, they're still going to kill each other. We have over a century of religious wars, the War of the Three Henrys, the Smalkalden League, the Habsburg-Valois Wars, the 30 Years' War, which, was super long just by virtue of the title. Okay, so you have over 100 years of Christians killing Christians, political as well as religious fragmentation as a result of these new branches of Christianity, because not everyone is Catholic anymore. But in terms of pros, Protestantism is going to lead to increased individuality. It's going to increase democracy, like with the Calvinist church, they elect who they choose to lead their church. The invention of the printing press is going to continue to spread not only ideas of the Renaissance, but also the ideas of the Reformation, and eventually spread the ideas of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, which goes a long way towards ending the practice of slavery, especially in the American colonies, and then also the foundation for capitalism in the New World. So big, broad effects. Also, you see a rise in nationalism. Now the political is going to be more important than the religious. Whereas prior to the Reformation, during the Middle Ages, religion was the major power. The Pope was the major power. Well, now the power of religion has decreased. People start taking political matters more seriously. They start thinking of themselves as a country, as Frenchmen, rather than Catholics. Okay, just like with the Habsburg Valois War, the French King Francis I siding with the Protestants because it hurts Spain. You start putting your country above your religion. The political trumps the religious. Does that make sense? All right, then when we get back on Monday, we're going to start talking about England and the Anglican Church, which is started by King Henry VIII when he wants to divorce his first wife. Don't worry, he has 6 total. When he wants to divorce his first wife in order to marry his side chick who he got pregnant so he could possibly have an heir to the throne. So very, very messy, very like Jerry Springer, Maury events going on in England during this time.